again. Here we are in my garden, late November, and today I'm going to show you a little bit about pruning and then a bit about tool care. I'll just go and get my secateurs. Okay, so the grapevine. I've got this wonderful grapevine here, which is part of which is outside and part of which is inside the greenhouse. And I only let the bit inside the greenhouse actually produce grapes. Get lovely grapes that way. So you've got all the energy of a big plant focusing on the small plant that is in the best microclimate inside the greenhouse. Now, winter pruning is dead easy. All you do is you just whip off anything that is there, the small ones like this. What you've got with a grapevine is you've got the main structural branches which go on from year to year, and you've got these little branches which are annual. They grow each year, and then at the end of the year they're cut off. That's all you do. Just make sure you leave one bud at the base, no more than one bud. If you leave more than one bud, these stubs here get longer and longer and longer, so you want to keep it quite neat. There's usually a bud very near the bottom, so it's really simple. And so I have summer pruned this. I'll show you summer pruning a bit next year, but winter pruning, it doesn't matter how long these are. If you haven't summer pruned, it's just the same. Go back to the base where they grew from at the beginning of the year, whether they're long or short or whatever. And you can do it whenever the leaves are off the vine. Now for the raspberries. Lovely fruit, aren't they, raspberries? The thing about raspberries is that they're very easy to prune. With summer fruiting raspberries, you just look out for those canes which have already fruited and you cut them off at the ground level. This is a first year cane which has not yet fruited. This is a second year cane which has, and you can see the difference in them. They're different in many ways. This one's got leaves, this one hasn't. This one's a maroon colour, this one's faded, pale colour. This one's got few branches, this one's got well-established branches. Now, one thing you can do is to let your raspberries move around the garden if you've got space. And this is a bit like crop rotation because they're always moving into clean ground. In the old ground where they've been a long time, there's a build-up of pests and diseases, etc. And you can see here, actually, we've got 3 different beds. That's an old bed. Very little left in that. Almost all second year canes. This is a mature one, which has got a mixture of first year canes and second year. And then further over, there's a new one that they've just spread into, which is all first year canes. The way they spread is by the roots. The roots of the raspberries go out and then new canes pop up. And that's what they're doing in situ, and that's the way they spread. I'm going to abandon this first bed. I'll take all the canes out during the winter and plant something else there next spring. Meanwhile, I'm going to prune this mature bed. And it could not be simpler, just a matter of going to right at the very bottom of all these second year canes and pruning them out. Okay, now for something completely different. This plant, which as you can see is in its winter guise, is skirret. If you'd been here a couple of months ago, you would have seen it in its summer glory of green leaves and so forth. It is a perennial root vegetable, and I'm just going to see whether there are lots of roots on it. I'm going to see if there is a handful of edible roots at the base of this plant. And indeed, here we have them. So skirret is, as I said, edible root vegetable, which goes on year after year. And the way you harvest it is just like this. You dig it up, you take off the biggest root, and you pop that back into the ground. So that will grow again for the next crop next year, and this I can eat. Has a flavour somewhere between carrot and parsnip. Very tasty. So, one thing I'm very keen on is looking after your tools. Now, this fork isn't very dirty. It's just got a bit of crumbly soil on it, so I just wipe it off. Now, if it was muddy, what I would do is I would wash it in plain water and then give it a coating of oil, a bit of old sump oil, something like that, and that will keep your tools in good condition. Some people recommend using stainless steel, but it's horrible stuff. I don't like stainless steel. Much rather use good old solid steel, and just take a little bit of care. You develop a good relationship with your tools like that. Anyway, this fork, I use this a certain amount. Obviously, no dig garden, you don't need a fork very often. But one thing I do use it for sometimes is opening up the ground a little bit. Where the ground is hard for one reason or another, without digging it, you can just open it up a little bit. I'll demonstrate. All I do is put the fork into the ground and push it down and lean back a bit. And then repeat that all over the bed. I mean, this bed doesn't need it. I'm just demonstrating what I do. Excellent way of loosening the soil if you need to, without digging, without turning the soil, without disturbing the soil ecology. Well worthwhile. And this is a steel-handled fork, because if you're doing that on really compacted soil, a wooden handle would break. It's what they call a tarmac fork. Get it from a builder's merchant. This actually is the only one of my tools that I've ever bought new. Most of my gardening tools come from boot sales or second-hand shops or somewhere like that, because on the whole, old tools are the best. Spade. I don't use a spade very much. We reorganised the garden a few years ago, remade the beds. Obviously it came in for a lot of use then, but you know, you need a spade. I use it for mixing potting compost and things like that. And then we have the three long-handled tools. This hoe, a lovely hoe. I made the handle myself, but I don't have much use for it. It's more of a tool for a large garden, but I've got it. I use it occasionally. Much more often, I use this nifty little hoe here, which is actually made out of a tool for stripping wallpaper. But it's lovely, sharp little thing, gets in between the plants, and I nip round with that. Takes me about 10 minutes to go around the whole garden, weed everything. And for bed preparation, a rake, especially when I'm sowing carrots. Carrots are about the only thing that I sow directly, apart from the broad beans and large seeded things like that, of course. But most things I grow in modules and plant out. But that's very useful for forming the beds. And finally, my favourite tool of the lot, my measuring trowel. I use a trowel for so many things. For planting out all those plants I grow in modules, for sowing beans and things like that. A bit of weeding. Scrape off a few weeds off the surface with it. But this one doubles up as a measuring tool. I'm afraid it's in imperial measurements. I'm trying to metricate myself, but this tool is a hinder to that process. Total length, 18 inches. Length of the blade, 6 inches. Length of the handle, 12 inches, a foot. So you can have any of those three measurements, and if you want 9 inches, you just measure the whole thing and take half. Brilliant. It saves so much work in the garden. I don't know if they still make these, but they should make a metric version. So, that's all for this time. I'll see you again in the spring. We'll be looking at all sorts of different things, but one thing I'm longing to show you is perennial vegetables, which have their peak during the springtime.